By now it's no secret that Resident Evil 8 Village borrowed heavily from Resident Evil 4. Things like the merchant, the inventory system, and even a few bosses feel like direct callbacks to the beloved GameCube classic. The entire setting too, a village somewhere in Europe, complete with its own castle and weird industrial factory / lab thing. But I think the biggest homage to RE4 was the village. Specifically, the intro sequence that takes place there. You know, the part with that old guy that looks a lot like Jim Varney, like they're doing some really dark reimagining of Ernest Scared Stupid. It's here you encounter your first enemy of the game in an isolated 1v1 scenario, armed only with a handgun and a knife. Starting to sound familiar? This provides a relatively safe way to test stuff out. You know, like how do they move? How many bullets will this take? Why does he disappear when I grab the bolt cutters? The fuck? The rest of the RE8 intro unfolds pretty similar to RE4's as well. You're given a crash course on door barricades before finding the shotgun to defend yourself against the seemingly impossible odds. Eventually, a bigger guy shows up to make sure you're not too stressed out.
You're kidding me!
It's all directly copied from RE4, and for good reason. I mean, who can forget their first time playing that village section in RE4? After enjoying a quick cutscene that sets the stage, you're immediately attacked by the first person you see. Shortly after this, you find an entire village full of people just like him, and things only get worse from there. Eventually, a big guy shows up and checks our stress levels. He's so thoughtful. Even though most of us will probably remember running into this house, barricading these doors, and grabbing the shotgun upstairs to deal with the enemies pouring in through the windows, it's completely optional.
Son of a...
If you want to try standing your ground outside, you can. If you want to run into the building on the right instead, you can. If you want to climb this tower and just hope for the best, you shouldn't, but you can. Normally the scene ends when the player kills around 15 enemies. But if you prioritize exploration and resource gathering over combat, you could also end up clearing the section without firing a single shot. After enough time passes, about 3 minutes or so, the scene will automatically end when the church bell tolls.
Oh, la campana.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
The same is true of Resident Evil 8, from the timer right down to the church bell. But while the intro in RE8 is obviously inspired by RE4, the way it plays is completely different. Not only is the timer an additional minute longer, but the enemies are much more difficult to deal with in Resident Evil 8. Mainly because the Lycans don't react to your shots the same way Ganados do in 4. You're not able to roundhouse kick the Lycans across the village or anything like that, but you can block their attacks and get by them most of the time. I don't think this by itself is a bad thing either. I don't need the combat system of RE4, but in that game the combat and enemies went hand in hand. And here there's no real combat system to fall back on other than some pretty basic gunplay. And to be honest, your guns kind of just suck early on, and resources are pretty limited. I first played the game on hardcore difficulty, as Capcom themselves have been recommending for veterans of the series to do. I didn't think RE8 was a difficult game on hardcore, but this intro almost had me switching to standard for a second. I'm not sure if there is a kill limit to trigger progress, but I gave up on finding it pretty quickly. Still, I think when comparing this intro to RE4, the biggest shortcoming for me is the level design. Instead of choosing your own path and doing your own dynamic problem solving, the answers are provided to you pretty clearly from the beginning. The game basically breadcrumbs you along into the house that holds the shotgun and then triggers the invisible timer to start. Though technically you could skip the house and continue up the hill to the stream first instead. You could use the barrels right away and end up at the house with a shotgun later. This is pretty much the only opportunity for a different route in the intro sequence. Every other path you can check before or after this is a quick dead end, and it puts you back on the obvious path you were intended to take. So ultimately you're led back to the shotgun path one way or the other. RE4 had plenty of dead ends too, but you learn pretty quickly that the shotgun or a roundhouse kick will get you out of pretty much any corner you're backed into. In RE8, you're more likely to kill a Lycan with like 2 shotgun shells, and you have maybe like 8 for the intro. not exactly enough to deal with all of this. I think if the area were a little more open and less bottlenecked, this may not have been such a big issue for me. Instead, the only path seems to be the one the developers want you on, and everything else just feels like a gotcha. So at some point you'll make your way under the house and make use of a new mechanic that helps you sneak away by hitting this bag of flour. Now, sometimes you can hide down here for a long time before a lichen will show up, and other times they're like right behind you and you're forced outside right away. I remember feeling confused about this because it felt like the game wanted me to hide and stall for as long as possible. There are 2 bags of flour and 3 barricades to help buy time. But after seeing all the explosives and getting a shotgun, I thought maybe I need to fight my way out? But then again, the weapons were so weak and the ammo so scarce, it just felt impossible. So I mean, it could just be me, but I was getting mixed signals as to what I should be trying. So after finding all the ammo, checking every door, and letting all the enemies kill me for the death scenes video, I started to give up hope. I knew this probably works similar to RE4 in some fashion, but if it was a timer, it felt like the only way to live long enough was to be as cheesy and lame as possible. And I have no problem playing lame in RE games. In fact, I usually try to beat them without any resources, often retrying an area if I take a single hit or expend too much ammo, but cluelessly running around the area and hoping for the best just didn't feel like it should be the intended solution. And I don't think the devs are expecting players to have insight on the hidden win conditions of RE4's intro. I mean, I get that you probably want the players to feel outnumbered and hopeless here, but I'm not sure it should ever be this confusing. In RE4 and 5 actually, the intro section has a timer and a kill-based win condition, but you never really notice because it's clear that you're meant to be fighting the horde the whole time. It never gets frustrating because you're free to run around the map in any direction, collecting ammo and holding your own along the way. Eventually the timer ends and you just feel a sense of accomplishment and relief to have survived. The village in RE4 has so many paths that you can take that you never really feel cornered unless you mess up, and if you do, there's always that sweet roundhouse kick. But here in RE8, every other path leads to a dead end, which usually results in your death. So I literally ended up running laps around the only path without a dead end, back to the house, through the tunnel, up and down the hill, and back to the house again for another lap. It felt so cheesy and so unintended that I thought it couldn't actually be the solution, but sure enough, after running laps for about 4 minutes, I accidentally fell into a cutscene that ends the segment. With no real understanding of how or why I got there, no satisfaction from solving the section or anything like that, just nothing. Sure, the exact same thing can happen in RE4, but you don't notice it. Partially because of the way the enemies and combat work in that game, but also due to the shorter timer and the clever layout of the village itself. Not to mention, it gives you enough ammo to kill 15 enemies and end the section that way instead. Either way, the cool thing about RE4's intro is that it just felt so organic and orchestrated, whereas this feels very constrained and more directed in comparison. If RE8's timer had been shorter, I probably would have been okay. Obviously, the game lays out a clear path for you to take, so you can hold off and hide for a bit. The problem is once you fail a few times to reach that timer you aren't even aware of, you start doubting your strategy and getting frustrated when nothing else is working. The game uses a lot of scripted events, and I almost feel like this is supposed to just be another one of those. When the timer goes off in 4 and that bell tolls, you might be a little confused, but mostly you're relieved to have survived it and you feel good. RE8, you're just confused. And worse, you're frustrated even when you clear it. To me, this was the hardest part of the game on hardcore, and I'm not alone in feeling this.
What?
I saw plenty of Reddit posts about it and Twitch streamers struggling with this section as well, and I have no doubt that I would have had a much better time with it on standard, which is a shame because the rest of the game on hardcore was just fine. It's just weird that this section felt so unbalanced. But it's not like I completely hated the RE8 intro itself either. All of the storytelling techniques the RE team has been implementing into their game since RE7, both visually and narratively, have been pretty awesome to see. I feel the series as a whole has matured quite a lot in this area, and it's exciting to watch it improve more and more with each game. And also, the first-person perspective really helps to make this a seriously tense introduction, and the first time I played it, it put a big smile on my face. It's just a shame I had to die and replay it for like almost an hour. Ultimately though, when you look at everything together, the combat, the limited paths, a win condition that isn't made clear to the player, all of these things are okay on their own, but they just don't really come together here in a way that worked for me at all, at least on hardcore. In short, RE4 did it better.
Thank you.
Before I go, I thought I'd show you the strategy speedrunners are using in case you ever get stuck on this sequence yourself. After grabbing the shotgun and taking the tunnel to the small house with the explosive barrel in it, you want to go back to where you started and unlock this door. Let it close behind you and quickly crouch in front of it and hold forward to block the Lycans from entering. This strat was found by streamer Trance and is currently the go-to strat for this sequence.
Hodor!
But yeah, that's pretty much it. I just want to hear from you guys. Let me know in the comment section how this went for you. Did you first play on standard or hardcore? And what was it like? Overall, I loved RE8, and I'll be learning the speedrun once I finish unlocking everything on my Twitch stream.
No!
If you enjoyed this video and want to check out my other stuff, I make videos centered around Resident Evil and speedrunning stuff too. So subscribe to catch any new videos, and as always, thank you for watching.
Cabrón. Cabrón. ¡Ah, por él! Cabrón. Cabrón. ¡Ah, por él!